Thank you so much for having me here today. And Gina, thank you so much for the invitation. I was really excited to speak about this topic and just to come back to Insight feels like home and this beautiful campus. So thank you so much. And also to our sponsors, Werner. This is really a fantastic initiative and we love working with our community partners. So thank you so much. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I think. That's operator error, I'm sure. Good now? There we go. Perfect. Okay. So as you all know, we're here to talk about protecting the supply chain. And this graphic, I went out to look for some graphics for the cover slide and actually got this from a guide to securing your supply chain from the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. So you might wonder, why does the Director of National Intelligence care about securing the supply chain? Well, we're going to talk about that today. I'm glad you're here. Okay, let's see. I'm sure it's operator error again. There we go. Okay, so I start all of my presentations with this quote from William Webster, former director of the CIA and the FBI, and he said, "Security is always seen as too much until the day it's not enough." And so this is a perfect example. Maersk, 2017, they were infected with malware and they went offline. You can imagine, excuse me, the biggest shipping company in the world going offline, and it cost them $300 million. So you better believe on that day, they'd wish that they'd done a couple other things to prevent this, right? But in security, we have to fight for resources. Resources are really valuable. And it's very hard to make a case when you go and talk to your CEO or your leader, the college president, and make your case for security. So I love this quote because we have to think about that day, the day that something bad happens and we look back and we think we could have done so many simple things, whether it's training, education, an extra gate, an armed guard, whatever it is. So I like to start with this quote to kind of lay the foundation. And I also start with this photo. So this is a very stormy sea, right? And so the supply chain in any security realm operates within the greater environment. We have to know what's happening outside of that environment that's impacting it. And right now, as you know, we have a lot of things happening from the security realm, from the government side, from the business side. I mean, plenty happening in that world as well. But I use this because there's a sun, right? There's a glimmer of hope because in the security world, we can get really depressed, to be honest. I mean, you feel like, am I making any progress? Are we doing any good out here? And there's always so much we could do. And that's one of the big takeaways from today is there's so much we can do and do it together in a partnership. But first, we have to look at the critical infrastructure of our country. And so this is these sectors, these 16 sectors make up everything that makes our country run. And obviously the supply chain touches every single one of these critical infrastructures. And you need to understand what's happening within each one. And it's too much for today's presentation. But within each of these, you know, there's security threats, there's actors, there's daily targeting of like substations, for instance. How does that impact you? Hospital violence is at an all-time high. How does that impact you with your suppliers? So it's all interconnected, but the supply chain touches everything, and so does transportation. And so we have to really be experts on what's happening around us and in our environment. And I will say, too, there's a lot of valuable resources on the CISA website. Each one of those critical infrastructures, if you click on it, it off-roads you to everything that you need. There's no need to reinvent the wheel with an exercise program, a checklist, a vulnerability assessment tool. It's all out there for you. Also training and videos, everything. So when I speak to a certain sector that we're trying to secure, they quickly tell me they're overwhelmed with regulations, right? And so this picture shows like just a few that touch the supply chain. And this person over here is like overwhelmed. You know, what do I do? All these people are telling me to do stuff. What do I really need to do? So I kind of like to dig into, you know, what do you actually really need to do and focus on? And so the first thing is laws. You know, you have to follow the law. And as we know, the laws are different in different countries. And so from a supply chain perspective, you may be working with 6 different countries to get your product from production into the hands of the consumer. What are all those laws along the way? Also, there's directives. And those directives are usually issued by governments or regulatory bodies. They're enforceable, and they're targeted to specific operations and actors. And the DHS binding operational directives are something that we need to look at because it touches on cyber. If you have a malware, ransomware attack, you have to report that to the government now. They're asking you, please don't pay the ransom. You don't have to pay the ransom. They will engage for you. They will take care of everything for you. Don't try to hide it. That's part of that directive. So it's definitely worth going out to take a look at. And then we have standards. What are standards? These are consensus-based. Subject matter experts get together and they come up with a standard. I'm on the School Security Standards Committee. We're getting ready to put out the first school security standard for the country. It's taken us 2.5 years. There's 27 of us on the committee. It's been quite a process. We're excited to get this work out to the schools so that they know how to do security, because a lot of them don't know. Standards are aspirational. People say, I could never meet this standard. It's too much. I don't have the money for all of this. But it's a goal, right? You still have to have a guidepost out there to work towards. And so we tell people, we understand you can't meet a standard, but you have to show that you're striving to meet that standard. Because if something bad happens and there's an investigation, there's a lawsuit, you have to explain all of this. If they say there's a standard and you didn't follow it, if you can at least show that you knew about it and you were striving to achieve it, that will help you. And then we have frameworks. There's the NIST cyber framework, for example, and these are just structured approaches to help you. And so what we're doing here is we're building, like if you think about a house, we're building a foundation and all the scaffolding for your security program. And there's guidance that comes out all the time, right? There's CISA, supply chain guidance. This isn't mandatory, but it helps you interpret everything else. So it's important to know about. And then there's best practices. And fortunately for you, there's a lot of guidance out there on best practices. So again, these are helping tools for you. So there's a lot out there, and you just need to, honestly, you need to go out and become an expert at these. You need to read it. Have somebody in your office go out and do this kind of legwork. It's really important. Oops, and that was just one web page. I'll see if I can go back to it. Again, there's so much out there for you on supply chain, and there's just a wealth of information from the government. And we're talking here about the government and the private sector. How do they work together? And this is a major theme of this discussion today. And sometimes I find that we're very stovepiped. So when I go out and I do security assessments, and I go and I do, let's say, airport security assessments, they're very stovepiped, right? Or when I do school security. And what I find as a practitioner at the 30,000-foot level is I see best practices from everywhere that can be harnessed and used at your location. Everybody has a cyber problem, right? Or everybody has a insider threat problem. So it's not just the supply chain and we're just going to be focused internally. You need to look out for external guidance. And the government also has that 30,000-foot look as well. So there's a lot of good products out there for you. So what's happened in the past with supply chain security and with all security is that we've shifted from compliance now to like a risk-based approach. So compliance, we talked about cost and schedule, performance, all these checklist kind of things. But the risk-based approach, it uncovers these hidden vulnerabilities that you don't know exist. It helps you be proactive. The whole thing about security is to be proactive, right? Not defensive. And we're very defensive with our security efforts. Something happens, there's a knee-jerk reaction to fix it. We want to get out ahead of everything. We want to be proactive, and that's what risk assessment does. And it has real-world impact because you identify the threat actors, trends, and what's happening around the world and how that could impact you. So the compliance-based approach sees the surface, and the risk-based model sees everything that's under the surface, kind of like an iceberg. And that's why we have to focus on risk. So the SolarWinds supply chain cyber attack is a perfect example of this. So this is a great software company in Tulsa, and they provided system management to a lot of users. I think they had 30,000 customers. And unfortunately, the hackers were able to get to those customers through SolarWinds. And this is fatal for a cyber company. How your customers are like, you can't protect us, right? And business is over. So this is really devastating. But before the attack, the company talks about how they were in this compliance-based approach. They had checklists. They assumed that security was happening because the vendor filled out the checklist. We know the vendor's doing it. And they missed all these sophisticated threats that basically got in the system and were embedded in their software updates, and then they sent that out to all their customers, basically. And it's happened with other companies. Target is a good example. So there was a Target breach a couple years ago, and when it first came out to the news, it said that the Target breach, and it was a million credit card information was stolen for 1 million people. And it came out that it happened through the air conditioning. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. Like, how did the hackers get through the air conditioning to the credit cards? It turned out it was a vendor who did their air conditioning. They had a contract with a company in Pennsylvania, and that somebody took a phishing email at the air conditioning company, and that got into Target's back door, basically, and stole all the credit card information. Now, how did the actors know that Target used this contractor is they said it online. There's way too much online about contracts and who companies contract with. And so a threat actor, if they want to get to you, if they can't get to you for some reason, they're going to try to go through your vendors and through all of your people that you're connected with. So they thought, well, they have antivirus protection. They completed our questionnaire, so we're good to go. There's security. And then they found out, well, actually, that's not true. So now these companies do a risk-based approach. They prioritize like constant monitoring. They're always asking the vendors questions. They're keeping on top of things. They're using threat intelligence now, to detect abnormal activity. And then they have contingency plans too, because a lot of companies, when this happens, they don't have a plan for how to continue business. They have no business continuity plan. So now they talk about what's the impact if a vendor is breached somehow, and then how do we reduce the risk? So let's go ahead and dig into the importance of the supply chain risk management, SCRM, which I'm sure a lot of the students in here know. And so why do we do this? What's the importance of it? First of all, streamlining processes to reduce costs. Of course, in the commercial industry, this is very important. Achieving efficiency with smooth operations, minimal delays. Customer satisfaction, that's a big goal with a company, obviously, to get the product to them accurately. And resilience, with the pandemic, taught us a lot. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And geopolitical conflicts, which is something we need to focus on right now. And then there's the human impact of this. What we found out during the pandemic is it's not just logistics, it supports life support for people. It's also food security, enables healthcare. I saw the statistic, it's 44 million people in the US are in the supply chain, in jobs that support the supply chain. That's a major chunk of our economy, so it's critical. But what we need to think about is that priority drives security. So when I go out and I work with a client, whether it's a hospital, an airport, a stadium, whatever it is, whatever they prioritize, that's what gets done with security. And so when you think about the companies that you work with in the supply chain, what do they prioritize from this list? This is a hypothetical question. That's what's going to be protected, right? So if they have to pick, let's just say, between like a ship filled with iPhones and a ship filled with wheat that's going somewhere, what are they more apt to try to protect? It's just how it is. But we need to think about that with security. You can't protect everything 100%. But where people focus, that's what gets secured. So it's worth mentioning. So we talked about risk, but I wanted to tell you before we talk about risk that there's a whole bunch of work that needs to happen before you do a risk assessment. When I go out to a client and I ask them, what kind of assessments do you do? Most of them say, I have a risk assessment. And then I start digging in. I'm like, what is this based on? Where's the legwork? Where's all the elbow grease that you put into this? And they really haven't done anything. They've just done a risk assessment. So I want to go through what it looks like before you do a risk assessment so you can see all the groundwork that you need to do. So the first thing we need to do is identify the target. We need to understand the threat. We need to assess vulnerability. We need to talk about the consequences. Then we calculate risk. And then we mitigate, if I can get to there we go. Then we mitigate. So after we do all this, that's when we buy things like cameras, new badging system, fancy gate, retina scans, whatever it is. You don't just jump out there and buy this stuff. It has to be informed by this entire process. So let's talk about the supply chain and let's go through each of these areas. But first, everyone needs to be at the table when you do these assessments. So I do a lot of tabletop exercises with clients, and I'll have them send me their plan, who's going to be at this tabletop exercise, and they'll send me a list of like 4 people. And then I'll send it back. I'll have added like 10 more people to the list because they don't realize everybody needs to be in the room when you do all of this. It's not just 2 people that do your risk assessment or your threat assessment. Everybody needs to be at the table. So this is just my brainstorming of people that I think need to be involved in these processes. You probably all can think of other people. But right now, it's really important to have a holistic view of these processes and cross-functional collaboration. So what are the key components? We have suppliers, of course. We have manufacturers. We have logistics and transportation. We have the warehousing and distribution. We have the retailers and the customers. And we have the technology, the data systems. And we have finance and compliance. So we have the contracts, all the back shop work that happens. And guess what? Each one of these areas is a target. They're targeted by different actors. They're targeted in different ways. So we have to think about it. We have to break this supply chain down into these subsectors and really think about how do we secure all of this? And it can feel overwhelming, right? I mean, just looking at this list, how do you possibly as a company secure all of this? So how you do it is a target analysis. A lot of this is cross-applied from the military, by the way. I mean, we do this all the time. We do risk assessment and we do target analysis, vulnerability assessment pretty much every day in the military. But the first thing we do is we understand what needs to be protected and why. Everything cannot be protected 100%. When I come on this campus and I look at all the things happening here, you can't protect everything here at the same level unless you're in the Middle East where I lived for 2 years and you make it a compound and you put a big wall around it and everybody goes through the same security and goes to do whatever their business is, which is a concept that works, by the way, for people in new construction. But you have to understand what needs to be protected and why. So how do we do this? First thing is you have to inventory. You have to know what you have, and that's assets. It's also people. People are part of this. Infrastructure, sensitive locations. You have to identify all the high-risk individuals, and then you have to prioritize. So once you get your list of targets, and let me tell you, there's a lot of psychology behind this too, because when I tell people you're a target, this is a target, they don't want to hear that. I mean, people do not want to think of that. A hospital, a school bus filled with kids, whatever, as a target, but then we're not properly protecting it. If we don't go there and realize that these are all targets, then we're not doing security like we need to. So then you prioritize it. You rank the assets by value in other ways. So now we talk about the threat actors. So who are the threat actors to the supply chain? There's a lot, obviously. A lot of people want to get involved in what's happening here. So how do you protect against all of these actors too, right? So you can see how this gets really complicated very quickly. But today is going to break it down for you, I think, into some manageable chunks. So a lot of times my clients will ask me, won't somebody tell me if there's a threat? Won't the FBI tell me there's a threat, or won't local law enforcement? And I usually put no up here for effect. But then last night I thought, I can think of a few instances, so I'm going to say probably not. Okay, so I just want to tell you that if you own or manage a property, whatever it is, there could be a threat against your property that you don't know about and no one's going to tell you. And so this is why hardening is really important. You may not know the threat, but you have to harden against a potential threat. If all of us do nothing, then imagine what this would look like, what security would look like in the United States. So we have to keep fighting this unknown enemy kind of thing. And I will say before I go further, New Orleans, the New Orleans attack, peeling it back to Germany. So before Christmas, there was a German Christmas market attack where a driver, ISIS-inspired driver, went into the Christmas market. And my daughter actually was in Germany, and she was about 30 miles away at another Christmas market the night that happened. So I knew about it right away. Our press barely touched on it. But instantly, what did I think? We need to start thinking about that at home. We have Christmas Eve coming up, we have New Year's, and we have the Super Bowl. And we need to get it spring into action because it feels far away to Americans when these things happen overseas, but those are the same threat actors that threaten us here at home. So when that happens, right away we need to shift to this mode. And that's why I'm saying that thinking that you're going to be told that there's a threat is just not going to happen. You have to expect it and anticipate it. So we do a threat analysis. Notice we're still on threat, right? We haven't gotten anywhere near risk yet. We do a threat analysis why your organization, node, hub, or product might be targeted. It's important to think about who are the actors that could target them. What are their tactics? What are their methodologies? New Year's Eve, the driver did not drive up the street at midnight. Okay, it was 3:10 in the morning. Why did he pick 3:10? Because it's an ISIS tactic to attack at the end of an event. Because they know we let our guard down. We break things down. We send people home. People are drunk. They love to hit events where people have had a lot to drink because they can't react. When you see a speeding car come at you and you're drunk, it's hard to get out of the way. They know this. That's a tactic for them. So knowing that, if you know the threat and you understand the tactics, then you can secure your events. So I tell concert venues, sporting venues, their security force needs to be engaged till that last person leaves, because this is a tactic we've seen used in Paris at the soccer stadium, Ariana Grande concert attack. I could list a few. So you have to know the tactics and methodologies to really have a good security plan. And then what are the capabilities of the actors that threaten you? Sometimes they don't really have capabilities. The threats are just verbal. They really can't act out on it. It's good for you to know. And all of this informs vulnerability and risk assessment, and also your security planning and budgeting. Last year I did a project for Insight, and I went out and I talked to security sectors. So I went to church security, conference and convention security, sports security, all the little niche areas. And one of the biggest challenges for them was to get a seat at the table when their organization was planning or when they were budgeting. And what I told them, what I used to do when I was at Andrews Air Force Base and I was in charge of security of Air Force One, was I just showed up at the meetings. I looked at the schedule, and if the boss had a meeting and they were talking about building a new airman dormitory, I just showed up. And nobody wants to see security coming because we were always going to ask for resources or people or whatever, but they're not going to throw you out when you show up, I found out. But you have to get up in these discussions. You have to get a seat at the table and force yourself into the discussions. And it's hard with security to make this argument. And it's another takeaway from last year's work was, how do you tie security to ROI, right? How do we know what attacks we've thwarted with all of our efforts? How do we know how many threat actors looked at our security and moved on? They said, you're too hard to hit. We don't know unless we catch one, or one lives through an attack and they say, I didn't hit X, Y, and Z because there was an armed guard or something that's valuable information. And Omar Mateen is a perfect example, the Pulse nightclub attacker. So Pulse was not his target. He never had Pulse in mind the night of the attack. It was Disney. And he went to Disney Springs shopping area. And his tactic was to take a baby carriage and put the gun in the baby carriage and cover it with a blanket and push it into Disney Springs and carry out a mass attack at Disney Springs. And they have the video from his phone and all the video showing this. And when he got there was a lot of armed security for some reason. And he was deterred. He knew he was not going to be able to carry out the attack. So he goes back to his vehicle, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and what's open? Nightclubs. So he gets on his phone and he Googles nightclubs, and he comes up with Eve nightclub in Orlando. And he goes to Eve and has a look. He decides it's too hard to hit. He keeps Googling and he comes up with Pulse. He goes to Pulse. He gets in the car and starts to head back to Eve, and he decides to go back to Pulse. So from a hardening perspective, what deterred him, right? What these places that he went, what deterred him, and then what pulled him in? What vulnerabilities did he see at Pulse that enabled his attack? That's what we do. We analyze threats and tactics, and then we can execute a good security plan. And this just happened a couple weeks ago. So this was a supply chain compromise. And if you go out on the CISA website, and you can see all this information, I use Google Alerts. I love it. I put in a few keywords, and it pushes me stuff every day, so I don't have to go out and read everything. It just really helps with my time management. So I went out and had a look. What are the top cyber and IT issues in 2025? And there's a lot. So the first one I think is really important, especially right now, is geopolitical tensions with all the different countries. What's happening with all the countries in the world and what's the impact on the supply chain. Third-party vendor risk. There's a lot of outsourcing, more than ever. I mean, the government outsources more than they've ever outsourced. And then just poor security practices with suppliers. You can be a company that has, perfect security, but if one of your suppliers doesn't, as we talked about in previous examples, they're going to bring danger to your doorstep. Supplier fraud. So we're seeing an increase in this using social engineering to contact offices and say that they're someone who's coming to pick up a shipment, a product, and then they're releasing the product to them. And they're driving away with 18-wheelers filled with equipment, hospital supplies, things they can resell on the black market. And also getting into vendor payments, which we talked about with Target. Digital risks. And please don't forget this. This is really important with Department of Defense. So I'm a contractor for DoD, so I have to take all their annual training. And we spend a lot of time talking about bringing your own device. So everybody has their phones, their fitness devices, everything. And then all the stuff that's Bluetooth enabled. And I'll tell you, healthcare devices is something we really need to think about. Pacemakers are Bluetooth now. Hearing aids are Bluetooth. Glucose monitors, things people need to live and survive, they're Bluetooth. So what do you do with an employee that needs to wear this to come to the workplace? How do you mitigate that possible backdoor to your system? So please don't overlook that. It's something DoD is focused on. If Department of Defense is focused on a threat, you need to focus on it as well. It's kind of a big takeaway from today. All right, let me catch up here with my notes. Okay, so very interesting. This week, I hosted in Charleston on Tuesday a security conference, And it was for InfraGard. I'm the chair for our region. And we had some folks come and talk to us about drones or unmanned aerial systems. I just call them drones because it's easier. And we talked about what can they do? What do they do? And they showed us some video that really blew me away, to be honest. First thing you need to know is that what's happening with drones really in a nefarious way came from the battlefield overseas. ISIS is an expert at drones. And I think we underestimate all the threat actors. The slide I showed with nation state and all these organized crime and everything, we tend to underestimate their capabilities. They're very technically competent, and they have everybody on the payroll. They have engineers, whatever they need, they can go out and get on their payroll. And they have massive budgets as well for things. So ISIS has used drones expertly on the battlefield. They pack them with C4. They use them as shooting platforms, listening devices, just to scare people, because a drone circling overhead can be terrifying. So we've learned a lot about nefarious drone use from ISIS, but in terms of supply chain and things that we're trying to protect, this is just some of the ways that drones are being used. And, they're difficult to detect. Obviously, they're small, they're quiet. And any drones that you use, which I know in the supply chain, drones are being used. I know at Charleston, down in our shipping area, there's drones flying around doing all kinds of stuff. Just remember that those can be hacked, right? Those can be hacked and turned against you somehow. So we'll talk about how to mitigate this. Oh no, I do not want to restart. Do I hit snooze? Okay, there we go. Okay, it wanted to restart. It's not good. But before I move on, I'll tell you what I saw yesterday that was really concerning. I saw a cyber attack from a drone. And it's something I never thought about. So the person was working in conjunction with malicious malware that was on a computer in an office. And then they flew the drone up to the window of this office, and it turned the computer screen on, and it went through all these different screens. And then the drone was taking pictures, basically, of this computer screen. So the company briefed us, and they're trying to get in the middle of mitigating some of these threats, and they showed us that, and it was a new angle, right? We have to be creative. The threat actors are creative. We can't just be static and think that this stuff can't happen. We need to use our imagination. Just checking my time. Okay, so drone threat mitigation. How do we mitigate? First of all, you have to understand the law. You can't just blow a drone out of the air. I know a lot of people want to, but it is like, a long time ago, the drone experts were talking on Tuesday about when hobby drone folks way back got them classified as aircraft, so we're stuck with it. It is what it is. They're not going to be able to change the law. So you have to understand the law. You have to invest in drone detection. There's only two, you could see them coming, but listening, hearing them, and then radar. Are they on radar? So there's detection. Then you need to tell everybody, if you see a drone, here's what we do, right? Have a plan. What do you do? Is there something sensitive you need to cover? Or maybe they need to protect themselves as well. Monitor all the local regulations. It's different everywhere. Of course, every country has different drone regulations. Every state has different type of regulations. And then partner with law enforcement. This is really important because there's some authority embedded in some different agencies that can help you with this. So that should be your first call. And try to hack your own drones. If you use drones, and if you don't know how to do it, go find like an 18-year-old who's really smart at this and have them try to do it for you and see what your vulnerabilities are. Oops. We're still talking about threat. The rest of the presentation goes quickly. I really want to focus on threat today. We have to talk about insider threat. DoD, when I took the insider threat training 2 weeks ago, the number one threat to DoD, it's not Iran, China, it's an insider. Whether it's a malicious insider or it's an unwitting person who does something dumb. The insider is going to bring you to your knees. You can have the best security. They have access. Then they can come and go. They can do whatever they want. They know all your vulnerabilities. They know everything. So that's what we really need to do. Focusing on, and nobody wants to talk about people. It's easier to talk about fences and cameras and whatever, but we have to talk about people and security. It's way too much to get into today. I do have a big insider threat presentation I'd love to give you. But just know that there's a National Insider Threat Task Force and a great website with a lot of information. But we have to talk about it. We have to fight Nemo, not in my organization. Humans are humans. They melt down for different reasons, and that brings danger to us. So in DoD, we have these key messages. The number one thing we want is for somebody who's struggling to come forward. That's the best thing that can happen, and seek assistance. So these are actually what we tell people. Seeking assistance to help deal with challenges is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of bravery. And then for people, we have this bystander syndrome. After there's an attack, people say, oh, I knew it was going to be Dave or whatever. Well, we need to fight bystander syndrome and have people come forward and speak about their fears. It's not an act of betrayal, right? And so this is the verbiage. And again, you can lift this directly from Department of Defense and build your own insider threat program. The best insider threat program I've seen besides DoD is Department of Transportation. Who knew? When I did a 3-year project for them, security project. They have a fantastic insider threat program. It's definitely worth checking out. It's all online as well. So next is vulnerability. What's vulnerability? These are the things that leave your asset, whatever it is, unprotected. This is also psychological. This is people that are like, it's not going to happen here. It's not going to happen today. Complacency is number one. We have to fight complacency. So psychological and sociological vulnerabilities are important to think about. Think about how and where an actor might strike. But when you think about all these different targets and everything, what I tell my clients is, let's talk about your Achilles heel. What's the one thing, if the threat actor could get to it, that's going to bring you to your knees? Your company's going to close. People are going to die. What is that one thing? And let's fix it. So I try to just boil it down to the one thing. But your ability to deter attack is completely underscored by understanding vulnerability. And then this is Carver. We use this. CIA. It was born in the CIA and DoD. There's a system. Have a system. I'm an expert witness. And when someone dies or they're injured on a property, I come in and I assess how well you did at protecting them or didn't do. What are the vulnerabilities that led to their death? And these are the questions I ask. What's your system? How did you decide to do this? Why did you get this camera system? Why isn't there an armed guard at the gate? You better have an answer, right? Especially when it's a lawsuit and it goes in front of a jury. So have a system, and it's all out there for you. You don't have to recreate the wheel. So know your suppliers. This is number one. You have to understand your suppliers. You have to understand their security posture. And for companies and for company leaders, you have to have some hard conversations, and you cannot avoid this. You need to talk about your view of security. What are your expectations from your vendors and your suppliers? You need to set and assess and also force to compliance some minimum security standards for them. And this includes guarding force companies too. Your guarding companies, I was on the board for the International Foundation of Protection Officers, and we looked at guarding force companies all over the world. They're low paid, high turnover. They don't invest the training that they need to. They have no counterintelligence training. Somebody could be out there surveying and taking pictures and they're not trained to look for that. You can train them, obviously. But it's important for you to have some kind of minimum security requirements and enforce that and build these demands in your contract and then hold your vendors to that. They're bringing risk to your company. And understand the access your suppliers have to your buildings, your people, your stuff. I did a credit union assessment. I went back at night because I wanted to see their parking lot lighting, and the lights were on inside. So I was like, who's inside at night? So I went in and had a look, and it was their janitorial staff that was just hanging out and playing foosball and just chilling, watching TV and stuff in there. It's a credit union headquarters. Like, what could go wrong, right? So that's the cleaning. Who has access, right? Think about who has access. Everybody has something important to somebody. They have some knowledge that somebody wants. And so everybody needs to be part of this, like I said at the beginning. So then we think about consequences. We're working towards risk. What are the consequences? And there's a lot. I just listed a couple here, but you have to list them out. Think about the bad day. What if the threat actor gets through? What's the consequences of that? And for some people, they're more focused on reputational than legal. Or they have insurance. They're like, we'll just pay for it with insurance. Whatever it is, you have to have some kind of structure and framework. And their RMF, this is what the Department of Defense uses to calculate risk. It's a heat map. And so for the left brainers, like, this is great. This is data, right? And for security, you need data to inform your resources and your planning. Now we get to mitigation. Now we're buying all the security stuff because we've done all this other work. We know what to buy. And effects-based hardening, this is just something I came up with from the military, because when a plane takes off with 2 bombs and goes to the battlefield, there's a specific place they're going to put these bombs. There's an effect that they want to have on the battlefield. And it has to be the same with security. You don't just put up cameras and do whatever. It has to be synchronized, right? It has to be prioritized. What are we doing this year? What do we really need to do? Can we do half of it? There has to be a plan. The security technology vendors, they'll try to sell you something, and you need to have do you really need it, right? So defense in depth, I would tell you, like rings of security, layers of security. Think of Andrews Air Force Base, and I've got Air Force One at the middle to protect, and I've got 20,000 people. I have dormitories filled with airmen. I have families. I have schools. I have preschools, all this other stuff to protect. So it's layers of security. So it doesn't start at the port entrance. It works out into the community and even to the internet. What are people saying about your location? A lot of people, before they go protest somewhere or go carry out an attack, they're online saying, I hate X, Y, and Z, and I'm going down there today. So you need to be online, and there's free software that'll push this to you. People were talking, if you're trending on Twitter or X or whatever, you don't want to be trending, right? It's good to know. Bake it in. This is from the Middle East. I lived there 2 years. Everything they did had security at the front. All their construction was thought about security. This building's a great building, by the way. I like this building. Bake it in. It has to be baked into all your processes. Security can be beautiful. It doesn't have to be ugly. When I tell people you need bollards, they just they don't want to hear about it. So I started taking pictures of beautiful bollards. And now I'm making a security message. I'm talking to the C-suite, and I'm starting to connect with them about, hey, I can do this and it can be beautiful. It can add property value. Or use what you have. These are photos from past inaugurations where they just use dump trucks, whatever. If there's a threat against your facility and you need to protect, you get everything out there you're not using and you protect all avenues of approach. It can be ugly. It doesn't matter. Just do it. Use SEPTED, right? This is a substation in a major U.S. city. I was out walking at night and I'm like, what is that over there? Curious me. And they're using bamboo and lighting to hide this substation. And we know substation attacks are on the rise. But SEPTED is something you can get a certificate in it, how to use nature. There's a credit union in Florida. They dug a big moat around the credit union, and now it's filled with alligators. And so at night, like no one is going to swim across. I thought that's beautiful. That's perfect SEPTED. This is a courthouse in Billings, Montana. They use natural rocks. Make it. Sometimes you want to be good partners in the community, right? You want to make it look beautiful. You can have security and have it be beautiful. This is a substation in California. They turned it into a park. They expanded their grid capacity. It's very protected underneath. No one's going to shoot it up. There's ways to do this. And we have to use our imagination because we talked about the threat actors. They're using their imagination, and we need to really up this. I was a tactical deception officer in the Air Force for 3 years on the stealth fighter program when America didn't even know we had the plane, and we had like 50 planes out in the outside of Las Vegas. Anyway, this is what we did. This is what the government does. It doesn't put a bullseye on the target and say, this is the most important thing we have. We off-road people. We divert their attention. There's ways to do this. And the best defense is to get on the offense, as we keep saying. And especially with schools, what I work with, they don't have a lot of money. So I try to really make them look hard using some natural features and also just some other deterrents. But there's ways to do this. And I will say, please be careful what is online. The Department of Transportation, I did the project for them. The first thing I did was go online and look at all the open source stuff I could get on bridges, dams. There's way too much out there. Even in shipping, we share way too much information. Ask why the information has to be out there to the public. Do the public need to see all this? In Charleston, they'll tell us when a big ship's coming in and what it's carrying and who. I don't need to know that as a citizen. I mean, it's cool to look at, but I really don't need to know what country it came from and everything else. So just have a look at that. Also, Google Maps. Now with my clients, I go to Google Maps and I look to see what's out there. I saw for a school assessment that I did, I never saw this, but the driver went off the main road in through their parking lots. And they were all pictures from last year. And they had I saw a hole in the fence. The back doors were propped open. I could see all the kindergarten parks where the kids were playing. We've had attacks, and we've had different threat actors do this from afar. We had someone in the UK that was Googling a place in Texas and actually came here to the synagogue there and carried out an attack. So go online and see what's out there. Also, your website. Don't overshare information the public doesn't need to know. Oh, I forgot to talk about that. I'm talking about using imagination. This is World War II. This is a Boeing factory that they built a town over top of it. So in the upper left, you can see it looks like a town from the top, and underneath they were building planes, and they hired people to come in and walk their dogs and have lunch. And this is the stuff that the government does. So why can't you do it, right? Steal a page from our book. That's what we do. The top here, these are substations. That house up there is in Toronto in a neighborhood. So they're trying to hide substations. And I'll tell you, know where your electricity comes from. Go and look at that substation. And if you don't like the security of it, you need to talk to the provider. and ask them to beef up security at the substation. They're not going to do it. They don't have money to do it. But right now we have different groups that are just trying to bring the grid down for reasons it's hard to understand. But go have a look. And these are, I'm obsessed with this now. These are 5G towers on the bottom because people don't want to look at them. So just think about that for your property. How can you disguise things on your property? Don't put a bullseye on what's important to you. Security technology, please ask what it can't do for you. I love security technology, and I have a lot of friends that are doing this, selling things, but they're not going to tell you what it doesn't do for you. You have to ask that question, and it's fine. It's never perfect, but you have to mitigate. If the metal detector doesn't detect knives, do bag checks. You put layered security in, but you have to ask the question. And please don't replace humans in security with technology. Nothing beats a human walking up to somebody who's about to do something, ask them, why are you here? Can I help you? What's in your bag? They don't want a human to interfere with them, okay? And they're not afraid of cameras. They're going to walk right past your cameras. So technology was meant to enhance human security, not replace it. And I'm seeing a big rush to replace all the human guards. Please be careful with that. And focus left of bang before the attack. Gunshot detection systems. That's after the attack happens. Call boxes, things like that. That should be invested before to prevent the attack. So AI, it's the elephant in the room. I was going to put an elephant up here, but this is scary. Like for some people, this is really scary. Like, is a robot going to do supply? Is robots going to decide all this? AI? And I'll ask you, have you been to the doctor lately? Because I went to the doctor recently, and I actually got on my chart and read, not just the email saying, no, everything's great. I actually read, and something was really messed up in there, and I contacted them. AI is doing all the reading of our charts now. When you go visit the doctor and they do the little, they're speaking, AI is doing all that, and it's going in your medical records. So if you're afraid of it handling the supply chain, it's handling our medical care. We have to face up, and I'm going to say that it strengthens us in a lot of ways. And I'm a user of AI. I'm not anti-AI. One thing it can do is identify risk. Scenario development is brilliant for that. You can put in, what if this happens in this country and I have a ship in this port and I've got to get this product? It'll do some amazing things. Real-time tracking of goods, where's everything? Is it been tampered with? Is it counterfeited? Integrates with cyber, with different information technology products. And also contracts. This is pretty cool because especially if you're working internationally and you get a contract from another country in a language you're not familiar with, it will help you go through the contract and identify things for you. And also if you're about to contract with somebody and you want to know if certain language is in that contract, it'll do that for you. So I'm not against it at all, but we do really need to talk about how it adds risk to the supply chain as well. We know garbage in, garbage out, and we've all used AI for something where it's choked. One is adding up numbers. I put a big list of numbers from a spreadsheet in there and had it added up, and it was completely wrong. It was just numbers, and I'm like, how can you do this other stuff and not add numbers? So we have to think it's maybe not perfect. Over-reliance on it, if people are relying on AI to give the answer, then they're not doing anything in an urgent situation, right? And we still need to use our brains. Adversaries obviously can get into AI systems, add bad information, data poisoning, spoofing. And then if that bad day comes and somebody asks you, how did you make this decision? And you say, oh, AI did it for us. Okay, you better be able to go back and detail how it came to that decision, and it's hard to do with AI. If you've used it in any way to generate, it keeps having new versions, and you're like, no, I want version 6, and you're trying to undo. It's not easy, so this is something that we need to think about. You have to be transparent, especially with taxpayers if you're in that realm, or a board or something like that. So today, in closing, here in a second, the power of public-private partnerships. We have to work together. I mean, we're in the same space, and there's so much to learn from each other. Public agencies, the government brings intelligence, regulatory reach, threat awareness, obviously. And then, bureaucracies are not good at imagination, right? And we're change resistant and everything else. And I think the private sector really pushes us. It pushes us to innovate and think out of the box. It gives agility and innovation. And together they help us with resilience, right? Faster response. And a good example that I found was this Operation Trusted Supplier, where DoD was working with a major firm and they were looking for critical issues with microelectronics. And they actually reduced the risk from a high-risk vendor, overseas vendor. So we're doing it, right? But we just need to do it more. So final thoughts. We can strike a balance between normalcy and vigilance. A lot of people, they don't want a ton of security. Nobody wants to feel like they come to college and go into prison, right? But there's a way to have balance. And I hope today I gave a couple of examples of how security can be beautiful. It can be inviting. Sometimes people don't even know what they're looking at. But the takeaway is you have to shape the environment that you want. You have to be proactive. You have to get on the defense. You have to take bold action and don't apologize for it. And that's one thing I learned living in the Middle East and traveling around is it was the price of admission. To go into a hotel, before you even got into the parking lot, they were asking for your reservation number. They were looking under your car. All packages, everything went through a metal detector before you got in the property. Now, I will say, once you're in the property, you can actually relax. You can relax. And when you go through heavy security like that, nobody ever apologized for anything, right? And when I moved back to the States, I had culture shock after 2 years of living in the Middle East. And people were like, I'm sorry, can I look in your bag? I'm sorry, I hate to ask you to go through, you were pulled for special security. Be bold about it, be strong about it, because on that bad day, you have to answer all these questions. And so just don't apologize for it. Have the security structure you want. I love Sun Tzu. I'm a big Art of War person. I think, read it. There's a lot of that it informs our security practice. But people say, I don't know, what if ISIS attacks? What if somebody's, and I tell them, instead of thinking about that, instead of focusing on the actor and it could happen, what are the odds? People say, what are the odds I'm going to be in an active shooting? Okay, and I'll tell them, your odds of being struck by lightning twice in your life are better than being in an active shooter or a mass shooting. That's what the odds are. Does it mean we do nothing? No. If we all did nothing, imagine what the security would look like. So what Sun Tzu says is don't focus on all that other stuff. Just focus on us. We've made our position unassailable. And that's why I've gotten into hardening, because I don't know about what threat actors, I don't know right now who's in the basement cooking up ricin or making package. I don't know, but I'm going to have my security and my facility, and it's going to be so strong that when they look at it, they're going to say, not here and not today. So this is my final slide. This is William Webster. So I started my talk with security is always seen as too much till the day it's not enough. I saw him at a conference in DC. He was 97 years old. A Homeland Security conference. He was looking for a New York Times. He'd flown in from LA. He's unbelievable. And I said, sir, I start my presentation with your quote, could I please have a picture? And he said, yes. So I just like to end with that. I really appreciate today and the platform. Thank you so much. You've been great. And I think we have some time for questions.
March Madness. We're in the middle of that right now. The Super Bowl's been over for a little while, but not that long ago. How was the NFL able to go ahead with that big event following the January 1st attack in New Orleans?
That's a good question. So one of the things that they did was bring in extra security. So I think they tapped air marshals. I want to say there were like 400 air marshals that went down to New Orleans. They were off duty to go and help augment security. So that's number one. If there's a threat, and like we said before, just because it happens overseas doesn't mean it's not going to happen here. We should anticipate it. So the number one thing I think is to beef up the presence of security. So if the threat actors do an assessment, doing surveillance, and they don't want anybody to interfere with their plans. So the more barriers we can put between them and the target, the better. They also backed off the radius, I think, of vehicles from the venue. I'm not an expert at what they did there, but looking at the pictures, I think they backed off and they did the layered defense, the rings of security. Those rings are really important. First of all, they're tripwires. So if a threat actor is trying to approach or do surveillance, the further out that we detect them, the better, obviously. But also, those are those layers that they don't want to get through. So pushing out security as far as possible from the venue, I believe that they did that. I know they blocked a lot of avenues of approach to the stadium, and they were using school buses. Go out and look at the pictures. They were using old dump trucks, like whatever wasn't in service, they were using it to block every single road. And we need to protect people from vehicles. It's not just malicious people driving into the crowds. People are distracted drivers now. They're impaired. They're angry. We have a lot of bad drivers. And every day, if you look, there's actually a gentleman on LinkedIn, Robert Ryder. He tracks every vehicle into a store every day, or like a cafe. And it's just people that are distracted and everything. I think he said there's 26 a day. So we need to protect queuing people, crowds, 4th of July parades, everything. We need to protect them from these avenues. And it could just be somebody who's has a medical emergency that steps on the gas instead of the brake, which has happened in the past.
Great, thank you. As a follow-up to that, you work with Major League Baseball and the NFL. What do these organizations do that might apply to industry partners or businesses?
Uh, I did work at Major League Baseball. So each baseball park has a RSA, a resident security agent, and they have training once a year. And so I've been able to go and work at this training. Every ballpark is in a different place, right? Even if you have a city with two major league teams, the ballparks are in different places. They have different neighborhood that they're in, different type of people go to the game. You know, each one, you can't, security is not a blanket thing. So you need to really look at locations. I always ask people what keeps you up at night. So I remember asking these ballpark security folks, what keeps you up at night? And they all had different concerns, which I thought was interesting. And interestingly, one said, what keeps me up at night are those ketchup and mustard pumps that are over by the hot dogs and hamburgers, because somebody could contaminate that and people put it on their food and they're gone and then they get sick. And I said, well, that's really smart to think about that. And to mitigate, obviously you go to packets, which I recycle everything in our house. So I hate the thought of all these packets, but that mitigates that threat. So I think also, just trying to think out of the box. Of course, drones are a threat to open air, and they also cannot blow them out of the sky. So they're very concerned about drones as well. But I think just understanding that if you own a business and you have a lot of locations, you can't say this is how you secure your facility. It has to be tailored to the facility, to what they're producing, who works there, the neighborhood, everything. It's not just a blanket thing, and it takes time, but it's important to tailor it.
So one of the things that happened a few years ago was COVID-19, and we learned a lot about disruptions in the supply chains as a result of that. How would it look different if it was a terrorist attack versus the COVID-19 pandemic?
A terrorist attack on the supply chain? Oh, the first thing that would happen would be an investigation. So everything would shut down, which would exacerbate the problem. I think, potentially people would be more forgiving if products didn't show up due to a terrorist attack. If you didn't get your Amazon package, but you understood that a warehouse had been attacked, as opposed to during the pandemic when people just expected organizations to be able to deliver things, like toilet paper and milk and the things that we ran out of. I think it would be shut down longer, definitely for the investigation. But we have to prepare for everything from pandemic to attack, so the way to do it is just be resilient, have a business continuity plan, think through the bad day, do the scenario planning, do a lot of exercises, a lot of tabletop exercises to talk about things, the what if things. So there's similar activities that can take place before the unknown happens, I guess.
We're at a university today, and universities are by definition open in most cases. So how do we manage or protect soft targets by that type of design?
It's really difficult. I mean, universities are very difficult to protect, obviously. If we had the Middle East version of a university with the big wall around it, it'd be a lot easier. The first thing is everybody needs to be vigilant. Today, even when I was standing out in front of the Residence Inn, a lot of professors and students were passing me, and I was saying good morning to everybody, and nobody heard me because they all had their earbuds in. And it became like a game to me. I'm like, who's going to be the first person that hears me? You have to be vigilant. If we tell people see something, say something, are they engaged in the process with us, the security process? And we have to encourage them to come out and report. A lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to be part of anything. They're afraid maybe. So there has to be a reporting system, a way for people to report threats. And like we said before, with bystander syndrome, that when something bad happens, somebody always says, I knew it was going to be them. Why didn't they come forward? It was because there wasn't a system there. There wasn't a way to do it. They didn't know what to say to who. So that's number one. I think the buildings, I think building security is super important. I think on this campus that I've been in quite a few buildings, and I'm pretty impressed with the security here. But everybody plays a part in security. I think sometimes people think, oh, it's the security officers got it. There's somebody at the front desk. No, we all do security in 2025. If you see a door that's propped open, if you see a problem, somebody leaves a bag in the cafeteria for too long, your spidey sense goes off. We all have intuition. We all have something that says this isn't right. And then just telling people, please act on that. So I think everyone playing a role in security is really important. But when you have an open campus like this, it's hard. It's like a small town when they say, how do I protect everything? How do I do that? It's difficult. But I think if all the people engaged, think of all the people on this campus, if they were all like in the security mindset and they were engaged, I think it would just raise the level of security so much.
So we have students from a lot of different disciplines involved with our discussion today. So some are going to be involved with companies and employers that have supply chains and supply chain management opportunities and challenges. Others are going to be more involved with things like security. How do we get involved with preserving both for all of the organizations, security and supply chains?
Well, there's a lot of different, well, as we looked at the supply chain as this vast thing, right? I mean, it's crazy if you go on YouTube and the video from when something's first being made all the way to delivery, and how does everybody get involved in security along that chain? And again, I think it just all comes down to the person, that we all do security. We all have to engage in this. And certainly if you're a user of a product, or and counterfeiting is a good example. Counterfeiting it happens all the time. Now with TikTok, there's people selling a lot of knockoff stuff on TikTok. How do we get involved in that? We need to get involved in that. How do we report that? How do we try to get that taken down? We don't just expect somebody else is going to do these things for us. So it kind of all comes down to the human, the person, all of us engaging. And if we see something that we think is wrong, or we see a practice that we think is a sloppy security practice, that we get involved in helping to take care of that.
Well, thank you very much for your discussion today. We really enjoyed it. So I want to thank you for being our presenter today. So
Thank you.
thank you, everybody, for coming today. Really appreciate your time for being here today.